So you're trying to get a group of partners to engage with you. Maybe you're starting a collaborative, something like a collective impact initiative, and you have a few partners or collaborators who are just not really engaging with you. Let's talk about what are some of the things you can think about or do to move your collaboration forward. First, let's dive into the literature just a little bit. When I'm thinking about collaborations, one of the books I like to remember is Diffusion of Innovation. So whenever you have a new innovation, let's say a collective impact initiative in your community, or maybe you're trying to get more partners to use data, like I'm often doing as an evaluator. People generally fall into 5 separate categories when they encounter a new innovation. First, you have your risk takers. These are the sorts of people who love to be on the bleeding edge and they like to try new innovations anytime they get a chance. Then you have early adopters. So these are the sorts of people who need a little bit of proof, but they still like to try out new innovations when they come across them. So instead of being right at the edge, they like to see others go first, but they're willing to try new things. Then you have the early majority. So these are the sorts of people who need proof before they try any new innovation. Then you have the late majority. So these are the sorts of people who are generally skeptical of new innovations, and they're going to need a little bit more proof to actually try something new. And finally, you have the laggards. So these are the sorts of people who are going to need a lot of information. They're going to still be very skeptical, even if they agree to come along and try the new innovation. So these are the sorts of people who might have waited years before they got a smartphone, or they might refuse to use some of the new technology in your organization. You can think of the risk takers and early adopters as visionaries. And the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards, they're more of a pragmatist. They really want proof before they move forward with an innovation or a new shift. And like I said, this new shift might be the collective impact initiative you're trying out, or it might be actually starting to use data and evaluation in your organization. When we're thinking about how innovations are diffused in a community or a population, generally what happens is the risk takers and those early adopters start to take in the innovation and start using it. And the uptake of using the innovation is very slow. So people might be very hesitant to begin with. And all of a sudden, there is a tipping point where the early majority come on strong and they just take over the innovation and they start using it with gusto. And then they're quickly followed on by the late adopters, and then the laggards are kind of dragged along after. And you can see this when we graph the way different technologies have been adopted into our culture. Things like the cell phone or the microwave. And you can use this to your advantage. Just knowing that there's going to be risk takers that are going to be willing to join your coalition or are going to be willing to try out using data, you can know that early adopters will come soon after and followed by the early majority where there's a tipping point. Another thing to consider is when you're creating a group like a coalition, there are generally stages of development. So first, groups form and they come together. They decide that they need to, work together to maybe tackle a complex challenge in the community. Then there is a storming phase where people might disagree about how to tackle said challenge, maybe disagree about processes and procedures on how to work together. Followed by a norming stage where people generally, develop processes and procedures that they all agree on that will work together for everyone, followed by an adjourning or an evolving stage. Knowing that, it's going to take some time for people to take in a new idea and move forward with it, especially a big group of people. And knowing that, it's normal for groups to have a storming stage is important. If you're taking those two things in mind, it's easier to trust the process and make sure you just keep working and moving forward with your collaboration. So the tip here is to start small with those who are willing. while leaving the door open for the early majority or the late majority, and maybe even some of those laggards to come along when they're finally ready. So ask yourself, who's interested? And what could those who are interested actually do together already? In terms of data collection, this might mean bringing in secondary sources to cover or talk about an issue in the community. In terms of collaboration, this might mean just getting together the group of folks that are interested in collaborating and meeting with them and talking about what assets they might bring to the table that you all can leverage together. For example, you can do a strategic doing workshop with those who are interested. You don't have to feel embarrassed about starting small. This is something that's very common when you're starting a new project. In the book, Introduction to Network Weaving, they have the following quote: "If the network has the capacity to reflect on these small collaborations and share the insights about patterns of success, it can reach a tipping point where the community starts operating in a qualitatively different way. People working together to co-create a community that is healthy for all becomes the norm." Basically, when you start small, you have opportunities to build trust with collaborators. Not only that, but you build some of that evidence that you're going to need to show to that early majority and the late majority to make sure that they're willing to come along. What you're trying to do by starting small is to just establish a pattern of collaboration. And in my case, in particular with data, I want to establish a pattern where people feel comfortable using data. Now, my tip to keep those small collaborations going is to be very clear about expectations. I think a lot of us in the nonprofit world and in the philanthropic space are pretty familiar with the term voluntold. This is when you're basically volunteered to do something you might not have already agreed to do. So this is one of the things we probably want to avoid when we're trying out those small collaborations. Remember, partners are willing to take a risk on collaborating with you. So it's really important for you to, be clear and transparent about what that collaboration looks like. But not only that, but be fair and equitable when you're collaborating with community members and other collaborative partners. It should be clear what people are expected to contribute to a collaboration, when deadlines are, and what exactly they're contributing. And generally speaking, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're asking them to contribute, they are willing to contribute. This is one of the reasons why I like those strategic doing workshops, and make sure to check out that video if you haven't already done so. Another tip to keep your collaboration going is to be agile, especially when you have these small collaborations or you're working on these smaller projects. It's easier for you to be nimble and adjust as needed. So you should take advantage of this. So this involves constantly reflecting on what are we collaborating on? Is it the right thing? How are we collaborating? Are there ways to improve or adapt our collaboration processes? I generally like those 3 questions from the HSC community. So what's going on here? So what does it mean? What are the implications for our work? Now what? What are we going to do together? When you go back and look at that tipping point chart, one of the things that's not clear here is that when everyone has adopted an innovation, sometimes it becomes obsolete. By making sure that you're always considering how you can improve or adapt your collaborative to meet your community's new needs, you're going to make sure that you have an answer for all those skeptics. For example, if you're trying to get more people to use data and you're constantly reviewing your data collection tools and processes and always looking for ways to improve those, you're going to be more, able to show skeptics that your tools work because you're constantly improving them. This is why it's important to always be looking for ways to improve or adapt. For example, you can evaluate your projects, the projects the collaborative is working on. in terms of data collection and evaluation, you can always be looking on how to improve your tools, processes, or procedures. In terms of the collaboration itself, you can actually measure how well you all are collaborating and reflect on that and improve. The next tip is to share information broadly. You want to make sure that people learn about your collaborative or the way you all are using data. For example, if you just completed an evaluation and you want to get more people to do evaluations in your network, then maybe you can share your evaluation and share some of those lessons learned. If your collaborative just put together a one-pager talking about why it's important for you all to come together and work on a complex issue, share that broadly. Instead of moving on to the next thing, make sure that you share what's working and the work you all are doing along the way. So this is the sort of information that early majority and late majority is going to be looking for. If you're never sharing this information, they're always going to think that joining your collaborative or using data is a risky thing to do, and they're going to wait until some of those risk takers get at it first. Not only do you want to be sharing information broadly, but you also want to be constantly sharing successes. The most effective way to share a success is when it comes from peers and it's tangible, unexpected, personal, and public. Now, the next tip is something that I've sort of woven in throughout. You want to make sure you're cognizant of the sorts of information people need to trust you. For those visionaries, you're going to want to be cutting edge, meaning you're going to want to show off how what you're doing is new and cool. For the pragmatists, you're going to want to show that it works. Different people need different types of evidence to move forward. Make sure that they feel that, collaborating with you is an asset and not a liability. Another tip is to understand that there will always be people who are going to be reluctant to participate. Your time is better spent focusing on those who are willing to participate, willing to contribute, willing to work with you to solve that complex problem, as opposed to those who don't want to. You have to trust the process, as I mentioned before. Work with those risk takers, work with those early adopters, and bring those people along. Soon enough, the early majority and the late majority will come. Don't forget to join my mailing list to get regular resources.